Welcome back, beautiful tri-state area. You're listening to a moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeart Radio. I'm your host, Zen Sams. Up next, in America's favorite pharmacist segment, brought to you by Triquetra Health, we're chatting with pharmaceutical expert Phil Cowley right here in studio at 710 WR iHeart Radio headquarters right here in Midtown Manhattan. Happy 2024 and welcome to a fabulous new year. Today we're chatting about the looming pharmaceutical crisis, rising costs of prescriptions, and why Congress is currently reviewing a new law requiring transparency from pharmaceutical manufacturers and pharmacy benefit managers. What is it that they're hiding? Now, drugstore chains for decades saturated U.S. cities, suburbs, and small towns with new stores. Now they're closing thousands of stores, leaving gaps in communities for medicines and essentials. Researchers find pharmacy closures lead to health risks, such as older adults failing to take medication. Rite Aid, the third largest standalone pharmacy chain, filed for bankruptcy in December and will reportedly close roughly 400 to 500 of its approximately 2,200 stores. Rite Aid was undone by competition from larger rivals, its $3.3 billion debt load, and expensive legal battles for its alleged role in fueling the opioid crisis. They said alleged, but that's some food for thought. Now, CVS, Walgreens, and Rite Aid are eliminating some locations as they face rising competitions for these items from Amazon and big box stores with pharmacies like Walmart and Dollar General in rural areas. But here to chat more and dice right into this is my expert at hand, pharmaceutical expert Phil Cowley. Welcome to the show, superstar.
Hey, thank you. Isn't New York gorgeous this time of year?
I love it. It's absolutely fantastic. It's infectious. Happy 2024. Can't wait to kick this year off and so excited to have you in studio. So let's chat about crisis in U.S. pharmacy closures. So Phil, we were talking about this just last week. The closure of 7% of CVS and Walgreens in the next year is very indicative of a significant shift in the pharmacy landscape overall. And if you really think of it, potential reasons for this could be multifaceted. Dissecting this is going to take days, but it could range from change in consumer behavior to broader economic factors. But it would be interesting to explore whether this trend is a result of increased reliance on online pharmacies, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, or perhaps changes in insurance reimbursement policies affecting pharmacy viability. What is the reason for this sudden shift?
Well, about 10 years ago, there was this huge shift away from what was the independent pharmacy. It used to be you'd walk into the pharmacy and they were owned by the guys or the girls that were inside the stores. Then there was this massive expansion of CVS, Walgreens, Rite Aids with the expansion of the Medicare payer system. Well, when that happened, you saw 50% of the independent pharmacies just disappear from the landscape, which gave the big players a lot more room. In comes COVID-19, and there's a lot of federal funding that comes in that allows for them to continue to expand. Well, their margins have dropped, and so now they're withdrawing, and this leaves people with nothing to do. I mean, you've got, for the first time ever, the people per pharmacy is going to be increased substantially. And so now you're leaving at-risk individuals and even more lower-income areas are going to be without pharmacies at all.
Well, when you put it like that, let's talk about exactly what you just said, the decreasing access ratio, because that's important. So the traditional ratio of 11,000 people per pharmacy decreasing is a very notable shift because it potentially is indicating challenges in accessibility to even healthcare services. But understanding the causes behind this change, in my opinion, is extremely crucial. And factors obviously include the population growing and changing demographics or shifts in healthcare infrastructure, but it could also be influenced by the increasing demand for healthcare services and the need for pharmacies to adapt to these evolving patient needs. That ratio is now moving to less access for the first time, like you just said, since the 1950s. But what is actually causing the shift?
So the shift comes a lot to do with margins and cost of goods. So there's been a huge push right now for transparency within Congress. So you have a lot of the prescription benefit managers like CVS and Express Scripts have to start to show where their margins are at, which when they have to start showing rebate programs, they've become less compliant to what the Congress wants. That's showing with a decrease in revenue for all of these PBMs. And because of that, they've reduced how much they're paying pharmacies. So now what you have is these places in Colorado and in Oklahoma and Washington where you have pharmacies walking out because right now 9,000 drug errors lead to either death or harmful effects that put people in hospitals. So now you have pharmacists that can't work underneath the conditions, so the profit margins are dropping. So instead of fixing the problem, they're moving them all to a single place. So you have to do everything mail order, and that allows for them to keep their margins high, but that doesn't give people what they need when it comes to community care. You need the pharmacies there. Most of the prescriptions that are being filled now by community pharmacists are not ones that should be being filled by mail order anyway. They're new prescriptions. They're antibiotics. They're things that people need today. And now they're trying to move it even more to a central fill and keep the ratio, the labor that would be inside that to be really low, which will increase the chances for errors.
This makes me it brings to mind an article I recently read about the retail pharmacy chains that overexpanded in the past, really often pushing out the local pharmacies in the process, right? And the number of independent pharmacies actually decreased by nearly 50% from 1980 to 2022. And this is according to McKinsey. CVS, the largest U.S. chain, closed 244 stores between 2018 and 2020. And in 2021, it announced plans to close another 1,000 stores by this year, 2024. So there's a lot of factors that are contributing to this, obviously. But now this brings me into segueing into high prescription costs in the U.S. So the trend of Americans paying more for prescriptions than any other country raises a ton of questions about the factors driving these costs. And exploring the reasons behind this discrepancy involves examining pharmaceutical pricing models, the role of insurance companies, and of course the influence of pharmaceutical manufacturers. And additionally, the potential policy changes or market forces that might alleviate this burden on consumers could really provide some valuable insights. Now, Phil, Americans pay more than any other country in the world for their prescriptions. Why?
Because corporate America gets away with it. I mean, it's that simple. They like to say it's because the regulations here are harder, or they like to give you lots of reasons. But you've got to keep in mind 90% of prescriptions that are filled inside the United States are generic medications, but they only make up 1/4 of the cost. So most of us, if you go into your cabinet right now, you'll look in there and there'll be almost all generic medications. Those generic medications only make up 25% of the cost. It's the brand name medications that cost the most. And the rebate system that has been for years is the thing that's driven all pharmacists crazy. So if you go in and you buy yourself a brand name medication through whatever PBM you have, they'll come in and you'll pay your 25%. So let's just say it's $1,000. You pay $250. And then you go home, you're like, it's expensive, but at least I have insurance. Well, then what happens is the manufacturers turn around and give the prescription benefit managers a kickback. They give them money. I don't like they call them rebates, but those
Sure.
rebates have never been out in the open.
Right.
So Congress for the last 2 years has been trying to push a clarity law, which the prescription benefit managers have said, well, we can't do it. It's too difficult. Well, now that they've demanded it, they're switching over their pricing to where now it's cost of the medication plus a little bit on top. That way they can show clarity. Remember, though, that clarity is only going to help on the generic medications, and that's not where the problem is.
So the transparency in legislation really is we should be focusing for the brands, not just the generics. Now, the congressional review of a law requiring transparency, this law that we're talking about from manufacturers and pharmacy benefit managers, what we call PBMs, suggests concern, to your point, about hidden aspects of the pharmaceutical industry, right? That's a red flag for me. And exploring the specifics of this legislation and understanding what information manufacturers and PBMs are currently not disclosing, of course, would shed light on the need for increased transparency. And I would think that this would involve discussions around drug pricing and strategies and rebates, or even potential conflicts of interest that impact consumer costs. So what is it that they're really trying to hide, and why do they need this law?
Well, it's interesting you would need it at all. I mean, if you have them working independently, there wouldn't be a need for this law. So the fact that the manufacturers and the PBMs both don't want this information to come out should have put an alarm out for every person that's out there. Because this increased cost, what will happen is the PBM will have a rebate. In order to offset that, the manufacturer will raise their prices, which then will cause the PBM to want a larger rebate. And in the end, it's the employers, it's the government, it's everybody who's actually paying the end bill suffering from this. In the meantime, your PBMs continue to show record-breaking amounts of profit. Your manufacturers are completely destroying everything. They're making so much money, and everybody's watching their stock. Everybody invests in these stocks because they do so well, but you should be questioning who's making that stock go up, because these prices continue to go up. With the reduction of the number of pharmacies and access, which you have to remember, these are lower income, elderly people that need to be in the pharmacies, be able to talk to somebody. The CVS announced that they expect to have their profit margins go up by between 4 and 6% just by closing these stores and making less accessibility.
It's terrible. So we have about 5 minutes left, but let's talk about cost plus model and consumer clarity. So Mark Cuban's initiative to change the way prescriptions are paid for through the cost plus model and CVS getting on board does signal a potential paradigm shift. So what does the cost plus model entail, and does it bring more transparency to prescription pricing? I mean, I, for one, would like to understand how this model aligns with consumer interests and whether it addresses concerns about hidden fees or unclear pricing structures. That would be valuable to me. But what does cost plus actually mean, and will this create clarity for the consumers?
We have to keep in mind that Mark Cuban is a genius. And it's unlikely that he's doing this out of just the goodness of his heart. The man is too smart for all of those things. But I love his plan, and here's why. What it's supposed to do is there's a list of drugs, and it comes out from a national list. So the national list will come out and say that each one of these medications should cost X amount of dollars. And then from that list, now the cost plus model, which is Mark Cuban's, and then the new Care Saver, I believe is what's called with Caremark's. They're both supposed to take that list and then put a markup above it, making it so pharmacies can function. There's a few issues with that, though, because we're not looking at what it's costing mail order pharmacies. That's going to be based off the list that is for retail pharmacies, which means Caremark, which owns their own mail order system. And now that Mark Cuban has his own mail order system, the idea there will be they can get their prices lower and then still ship them out. So it will have transparency at the local level. You walk in and talk to your pharmacist and she says this is what it costs. That's probably true. But the mail order systems, which then report back to your employers and to the federal government, their cost will be completely different. So there still will be quite a bit of markup. And most of your major groups within the pharmacy world doesn't believe that the consumer will save a dime with these cost plus systems.
And what's interesting is that earlier we talked about, the impact of generic drugs, but, to the extent that generic drugs contribute to the cost dynamic in the U.S. pharmaceutical market in a way where that is the main driver, these policies obviously are encouraging their adoption to mitigate the costs. But what we are really seeking is transparency on the brand, not necessarily just the generics, from what I'm understanding.
And
correct?
The biologics. So
Right.
anything that ends with the word MAB, that makes up 3% of all prescriptions end with those words, the biologics, and they make up almost 25% of all the costs. And we're not even looking at the biologics to save money. And then in Congress, they make this magic list of 10 drugs, and they think that those 10 drugs, by reducing the price of those 10 drugs, somehow we're going to save money. This is all just the dog and pony act until we really start looking at what brand names cost and who's paying for the research behind it. We're never going to drop any of the money down. You cannot save that much money off of the generic drugs, no matter how much they change. It doesn't make enough of the cost of goods.
Boy, they must love you.
Yeah, I'm always making friends, aren't I?
Yeah, Big Pharma must love Phil's my pharmacist here.
I think that everybody's hurting, though. I think the PBMs are trying to find a way through this system. The whole system is broken, and if you can't fix the system, all of these other things won't work. And so I think that PBMs actually are trying to do their best with what they have. I think the manufacturers are too, but we've made this just awful mess where this person's paying that person, which then gives a little bit over here. And the whole thing is such a wreck. I don't think that there's a great evil behind it, but rather the whole system is so broken. You're trying to fix a car that hasn't run in 35 years and 3 of the pistons are out. I mean, at this time, it's time to go look at a new car.
Yeah, all these payoffs, rebates, whatever you want to call them,
I don't think anybody's really winning.
It's counterproductive, and it's really, really keeping a lot of people quiet about things they shouldn't be. Now, we have about 1 minute left. Of course, in 1 minute, you're great at summing things up. But how do pharmaceutical trends and policies in other countries, Phil, compare to those in the U.S.? And are there lessons or best practices that could be applied to improve the situation domestically?
Well, the thing I really like about places other than the United States is they try to bring in all sorts of types of medicine. And so places like Germany and the UK, they work a lot more with supplements. So good brand name supplements like Triquetra, where you can use something for your blood pressure, which is substantially cheaper and natural in nature. You can find it, you can use it, you feel good about it because it's coming from beetroot or whatever plant it is. And then they tie that in, and then they have a lot of clarity to where you have the government now managing which medications can be on their list. If we're really going to do this, we need to have clarity that's run by somebody other than corporate America that has already had all these, these deals and going on to the side. So you can't have all these rebate programs and have it work. Using natural medicine from supplements, and then on top of it, adding in national formularies, and then throwing in the mix of what we have with the corporate America, something in between, it will work, but we have to revamp the whole system beginning to end.
Boy, you have your work cut out for you. Well, that's the end of this incredible segment. Phil, thank you so much for a very transparent and very informative segment. I learned a ton, and I know those out there listening just got their crash course in pharmaceutical expertise for 2024.
Yeah, it'll be good. I think more people know, they're going to all look at it and say, yes, this makes sense.
This totally makes sense. Well, we are at the end. Thank you for joining us, my friend.
Thank you.
That was America's Favorite Pharmacist, brought to you by Triquetra Health. You can head to triquetrahealth.com. That was Phil Cowley. You can check him out on the gram at Phil's My Pharmacist. You're listening to A Moment of Zen right here on 710 WOR, the voice of New York, iHeart Radio. Happy New Year. Invest for 2024. We'll be right back after this.